Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 9. Super colossal holes. In Antarctica, gigantic holes sometimes appear in the ice. In the middle of the brutal winter, when temperatures are so cold you can get hypothermia within minutes, suddenly massive holes open in the sea ice. I don't mean massive holes like the size of a car or a truck. These holes are the size of South Carolina or bigger. The puzzling phenomenon occurred most recently during the winter in 2016 and 2017, but it's been happening for a long time, with even bigger holes seen in the 1970s. For decades, scientists have struggled to figure out what is causing such a strange phenomenon. They call the holes polynyas, which is a Russian word meaning hole in the ice. It's a pretty accurate name. According to new research, which involved analyzing data from NASA satellites and using sensors placed on the heads of elephant seals, it's all about the environment. The huge patches of ice are melted because of really warm water underneath. Most of the holes are also near a submarine mountain that's been referred to as the underwater Mount Everest. Scientists think that violent storms in the winter blow hurricane-force winds through gaps in the ice, stirring the water underneath. The water swirls around the sunken mountain, churning itself into a frenzy. The cold layer of water that should be near the surface ends up getting mixed with the warmer and saltier water, and thus an area of ice the size of an entire state is melted into a gaping hole. Number 8. The murder scene of the Tyrolean Iceman. It's true that at this very second, the European Alps are losing a significant amount of ice. But it isn't the first time such a thing has happened. Scientists know about at least 2 different periods during ancient times when the mountains lost their glaciers. There was a warm phase in the Roman era that saw the Alps lose much of their ice. A similar warm phase occurred in the medieval days, leaving the mountains bare and warm. Experts suspect the warming and cooling of the Alps is something that happens on a fairly regular basis. They think there may have been a third recent warming event that took place just before 3370 BC. This warming happened prior to the death of the world's favorite Iceman. In 1991, German tourists came across the frozen remains of a mummy in the Ötztal Alps. The mummy is now known under a few names, such as the Tyrolean Iceman or Ötzi the Iceman. He was about 45 years old when he ventured into the mountains and perished at an altitude of 10,531 feet. There have been plenty of studies done on Ötzi, with scientists picking apart his clothes, diet, and body. They believe he was shot with an arrow as part of a botched murder attempt. Then he fled into the mountains hoping to escape, only to die and freeze. What everybody wants to know now is what the mountains were like when he was alive 5,300 years ago. They think he may have died at a time when there wasn't very much ice in the Ötztal Alps. Why else would this guy climb 10,000 feet with nothing to protect himself from the elements? Researchers from the Austrian Academy of Sciences collected 2 ice core samples from the frozen bedrock where Ötzi was discovered. They radiocarbon dated the ice, finding the oldest sample to be 5,900 years old. Their study concluded that the ice in the Alps only started to form a few years before the Tyrolean Iceman met his doom. The ice also likely only formed at extreme altitudes. Most of the Alps may have been even less snowy and icy than they are now. Rather than freezing to death, Ötzi may have died some other way. He could have fallen into a crevice which had ice at its bottom to freeze him. The takeaway is that if correct, the Alps have already lost and regrown their ice 3 times since Ötzi lived. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Duke of the Dance and Lee Bremmel for supporting this channel. Thanks, you guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Number 7. Guardian Angels. In 1933, British adventurer Frank Smith just about became the first man to reach the top of Mount Everest. It was a difficult journey that nearly resulted in catastrophic failure. The party could not make it through the wind and ice with such little oxygen. Even with the rest of his party falling back to safety, Frank continued toward the summit. He got within 1,000 feet, but was forced to turn around. Later, Frank wrote something unusual in his journal. He described something that is now known as the third man factor. Frank said that as he climbed the mountain, he pulled out a piece of cake from his pocket. He snapped the frozen cake in half and handed one piece to his companion. Yet he was alone. Frank had the overwhelming sensation that somebody was accompanying him. He didn't feel lonely at all. There seemed to be a stranger there who wanted a bite of his cake. Frank was not the only adventurer who encountered this phenomenon. Survivors of terrible disasters often discuss how they felt as if someone were there alongside them. Many of the bravest Arctic explorers had identical experiences of a guardian angel when death crept close. Ernest Shackleton was another example. During his Antarctic expedition in 1916, he and his crew were on the verge of death. Their boat got stuck in the ice, and they had no choice but to walk to the nearest whaling station in Stromness Bay. They narrowly made it to the station with their lives. Afterward, Shackleton wrote that it seemed in the last leg of their journey that there was a stranger there, helping them through the blizzard. What do you think of this phenomenon? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6. The Lady of Aato. The Inca did not need fancy embalming techniques to create mummies. They just needed a bit of ice and dry air. In 1995, anthropologist Johann Reinhardt uncovered the frozen body of a girl who died nearly 600 years ago. She was discovered bundled in cloth on Mount Aato, which happens to be a dormant volcano. She is now known as the Lady of Aato, one of the best preserved human sacrifice victims in the world. Some just call her Juanita. The mummy has been on display in Peru pretty much continuously since 1996. Analysis has shown that she was between 12 and 15 years old at the time of her death. She was killed as an offering to the Inca gods around the year 1440. The ritual was known as capacocha. It was a very important part of Inca culture, something they did whenever there was something big to celebrate. For example, a successful military expansion or a festival. The analysis of her stomach contents showed that she had been given a healthy meal of vegetables 8 hours before her death. She likely came from a noble family in Cusco. In the 6 weeks before she was sacrificed, the teenage girl was loaded with drugs and alcohol. She was extremely intoxicated, fed copious amounts of what was essentially raw cocaine. By the time she was bludgeoned to death on top of the volcano, she must have been in a state of unconsciousness. When it came to capacocha, the victims were either beaten in the head with a blunt object or strangled. Either way, it wasn't a great experience for anyone involved. The girl's body was left on the mountain, where it froze into a human ice cube for scientists to find later. Number 5. Frozen fruit in Siberia. 30,000 years ago, squirrels living in Siberia buried some fruit and forgot about it. All these years later, scientists found the fruit and resurrected them. Researchers dug the ancient fruit out of the Russian ice, then regenerated the plants. The newly regenerated plants produced their own seeds and continue to spread their family line as if nothing ever happened. This was all thanks to David Gilichinsky and his team of scientists. And you can't forget to thank the squirrel that buried the fruit in the first place. The food was in the squirrel's burrow, which was buried under layers of ice. Everything in the burrow was kept in sub-zero temperatures for the past 31,800 years. When scientists finally found the squirrel's burrow, it had gone from being at the surface to buried nearly 150 feet underground. Using the immature fruit recovered from the burrow, scientists at the Russian Academy of Sciences grew the plants. Then their placentas were extracted, bathed in a special brew, and coaxed into making roots and shoots. The result was that the frozen fruits turned into thriving plants. According to National Geographic, it's the first time anyone has successfully grown food from seed tissue found buried in an ice-age squirrel's burrow. Ta-da! Number 4. The Fossilized Forest. There is a fossilized forest on an island in northern Canada. It dates to 45 million years ago during the Eocene era, when the planet was a much different place. Even with long months of winter, Canada's Arctic region was about as warm as Florida is today. The Arctic didn't need sunlight to be balmy and tropical. In the 1800s, explorers on Axel Heiberg Island came across the remains of one of these tropical forests. In a place that's classified as a polar desert, they identified fossilized tree trunks. The whole place is littered with tree stumps that have been partially mineralized. The stumps, scientists now know, have been standing in the same place for millions of years. The Native Americans who lived here have known about the site for centuries. However, scientists didn't really take an interest until 1985. That was when the Geological Survey of Canada started actively studying the place. They quickly discovered chunks of wood from the Dawn redwood tree that had been buried in snow, with the wood being at least 40 million years old. The Dawn redwood tree only survives today in China's Hubei province. Scientists also found some species of extinct trees on Axel Heiberg Island. They uncovered leaves, seeds, and pine cones from the ancient woodland. Scientists figure the forest was rapidly buried under fine sediments. There was a great cataclysm that buried the tree stumps, and now they're being revealed thanks to climate change. Number 3. The Mammoth Virus. For 30,000 years, something frightening remained trapped in the Siberian permafrost. Now, researchers are studying it. A team of scientists from Marseille University in France discovered a previously unknown giant virus. It's called Pithovirus sibericum, but you can call it the Mammoth Virus. A giant virus is loosely defined as a virus that's visible underneath a regular microscope. You can't see it with your naked eye, but you can see it pretty easily with a simple piece of equipment. The virus that's just been pulled out of the permafrost is still technically microscopic, but in the world of viruses, it dwarfs most others. It dwarfs other viruses not only in size, but in the complexity of its makeup. The newly discovered Mammoth virus has a whopping 500 genes. That's huge compared to something like the notorious HIV virus that only has 12 genes. If something with only 12 genes can cause the kind of devastation that came with HIV, what could something with 500 genes do to the human population? It's a question that keeps a lot of people up at night. Even more frightening is the fact that the Mammoth virus is still alive. Scientists brought the virus back to their laboratory and exposed it to amoebas. The virus was still active, easily infecting the host cell. The amoebas work as bait to capture the virus. The researchers then worked overtime to verify that the virus would not infect any human or animal cells. This instance wasn't a disaster, but it could be a disaster in the future. Being big and full of genes makes giant viruses more resistant to thousands of years in the cold. As more permafrost melts and the world gets warmer, these things could be released like toxic spores on the wind. How do you feel about scientists messing with dangerous viruses like this? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 2. Relics of War. In the Italian Alps, relics of the First World War were discovered in a melting ice patch. The relics date to just before the end of the war in 1918. Soldiers battled in the Alps as part of the White War. Italian troops fought against the forces of the Austro-Hungarian army along frozen alpine terrain 10,000 feet above sea level. The soldiers established their barracks in caves. They fought in hand-to-hand combat on the slopes. These battles were mainly waged along the Alps in Lombardy and in the Dolomites. The White War was largely forgotten until the 1990s, when weapons, letters, and bodies were found thawing from the ice. The most recent discovery came in the form of a forgotten barracks. The barracks was abandoned when the war finally ended and the soldiers were allowed to go home. After they left, the barracks was sealed behind a wall of impenetrable ice. But now, with the advanced warming in the Alps, that ice barrier melted. It was a surprise to find the barracks. It was like a time capsule with everything the soldiers had in there still perfectly preserved. There are postcards, scraps of cloth, lanterns, newspapers. You can even see the beds of straw where the soldiers slept in cold misery. Empty tin cans of food and animal bones sucked dry of their marrow. It's a glimpse into the true terror of the White War. Historians believe more soldiers died from avalanches and hypothermia than from combat itself. Number 1. Icy Jesus. In winter 2022, an ice statue of Jesus was discovered outside Ben Tucci's home in Lake Erie, Canada. Ben walked out of his house and saw a formation made of solid ice that looked suspiciously like Jesus Christ on the cross. The figure was likely made by waves hitting Ben's neighbor's lamppost and steadily freezing. From a distance, though, the figure looked like an angel with wings, or like Christ on a crucifix. It was really a matter of interpretation and perception. Ben posted a photograph of the frozen lamppost online, leading to a slew of speculation. Some called it a sign from God. Most said it was nothing but an interesting coincidence. The icy Jesus wasn't the first time Ben posted something strange. He has a long history of posting pictures of ice formations and comparing them to things like Jack Frost and the Grim Reaper. But it wasn't until the lamppost turned into a crucifix that any of Ben's pictures went viral. What do you think is the deal with Icy Jesus? A sign from God or a weird coincidence? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!